Translating user interfaces traditionally comes at the cost of code verbosity and often requires deep linguistic knowledge of the target language of the authoring user. So engineers often want to move fast, so this comes at odds with getting your UI translated. So we came up with the solution at Facebook that enables both of these things. So first I'm going to go over the agenda that we'll be covering today. One is how we support scale at Facebook and basically why this mattered to us. The architecture around FBT that we'll be covering today, the API and runtime, and finally we'll be going over a pretty brief demo, kind of going through the rough architecture and showing you the flow of what it looks like from a UI engineer's perspective, running through all the way through translations. So why does this matter to us? Facebook itself is available in over 100 languages and dialects. Our translators produce over 2 million translated words every week, and that's an amount equivalent to roughly double the Harry Potter book series. And more than half of our users use our products in a language other than English. Click. Well, there we go. Something happened. All right. We don't like animations here, so I think these are the last ones. So it's crucial, because we have 57% of our users using our products in a language other than English, that we get that experience right, and that we make sure that their experience is just as engaging as the author intended. So like we said, again, engineers want to move fast. And as we mentioned, this comes at the cost of accurate translations. So how do we ensure that we translate these accurately? One crucial step we make is in lowering the burden it takes the engineer to get their text translated. And we do this with our inline markup language called FBT. So we're going to run through a simple and canonical example of what it looks like, and here with a hello world example, which no tech talk is complete without. So the engineer simply wraps their text in FBT, and this marks it for extraction. And through a build time process, extracts it, gets it translated, and back into the source text. You'll notice that we have a required attribute called description, and this is to make sure translators have context about what they're translating. And this is crucial to getting accurate translations. So we make this a required input. So this comes with a few other benefits. Firstly, code is now self-documenting. You're not referencing some opaque identifier in your code. You read it and you know exactly what this UI is about and what this business logic represents. Secondly, text is now searchable. So that's one less hop to make when you're debugging some UI. You're not looking for yet another thing to look for in another database. You're looking straight at code. And finally, there's development velocity. There's very little to do if you want to mark your text for extraction. So before we get into the details of the API, I want to walk you through the architecture and what this all looks like when it all fits together and how it operates at Facebook scale. So let's start with the flow of the FBT text to its translated form. So first, obviously, the engineer authors their text. And then in an offline build time process, we extract all FBT instances. In another offline process, translations are extracted and put in another separate data store where they're associated with that original FBT. Finally, translated source is generated where we generate runtime dictionaries, or we inline replace English payloads into the original, we replace English payloads with the translated payload. And here we can see how the architecture all fits together. So after translating source text and extracting it, what FBT provides is all the highlighted section you see in blue. So translation is kind of up to the app developer, as is the storage. But outside of that, we provide source string extraction, source transpilation, and finally generating translation dictionaries once you have your translations. So now that we've had a kind of overview of the architecture, we'll dive into the API and see what it looks like from a UI engineer's perspective. So we've already seen the trivial example with Hello World. Let's take a look at what interpolation looks like. Interpolation can be used to add dynamic content, and in this example, we're using it to add markup. So here we have the full sentence, click this button. And button is a token, and that's how it looks like to a translator with a bracket button. And that's because we are adding markup within that FBT param you see there. And that's how we're getting our markup into this translated text. Here it's just another redundant button where we have another label called button, but not the point of this example. The point is that we can add markup arbitrarily into any given text that we need to translate. So you can see that the parameter takes a name, and that's what the translator sees as the token. One of the more common struggles in constructing text also is getting English and non-English plural strings correct. So here's an example pitfall. I don't know if any of you can spot the problem with this example, but on top of creating the string shared links to one photos will no longer work in English. For a language like Arabic, you have 5 other tenses that can also potentially break. So FBT provides the FBT Plural Construct to make writing correct English grammar easier and to enable translations to multiplex as determined by the translator into their appropriate translation. So here we're constructing the same string but correctly. So we have shared links to this photo for English, for the English singular, and shared links to these photo with the number included, as you can see in count. And so we'll pick the right sentence depending on that runtime variable num photos. You'll notice the author provides the singular case as a required child and the plural case in that many attribute. So here's what an example of our runtime call looks like if we were to transpile this inline, like I mentioned earlier in the architecture section. So here we're looking at an example for Spanish, but highlighted in purple you'll see where those sentences differ for the plural and the singular case. We have estas photos and esta photo. So again, based on the plural rules for a given locale, and in this case Spanish, we'll pick the correct text in our runtime table, keyed off that runtime variable num photos. So let's look at more complicated examples with FBT Plural before we move on. Here we're using 2 instances of FBT Plural to create cohesive text while maintaining grammatical correctness. We're constructing 2 sentences total using 2 FBT plurals referencing the same variable. So we have shared links like these 10 photos will no longer work, and shared links like this photo will no longer work. And you'll notice that in the second FBT plural, we're using the show count attribute. And this can be a no, yes, or if many. Here we're using if many, and what this does is adds that number that we key off of at runtime into the sentence itself, and only in the plural case. So that's why we get that sentence, shared links to these num token photos will no longer work. And you'll also notice that even though there are 2 FBT plural instances, we're not creating 4 separate sentences with this num photos or these photo, the grammatically incorrect English sentences. And that's because we're using the same variable at runtime num photos. And again, we can look at what this runtime would look like in the Russian locale, for instance, with all the multiplexing happening with these sentences. So you'll see num inserted into these plural cases. So we saw how FBT handles the complexities of plurals. Let's take a look at how it tackles gender variations. So here's a pop quiz. What's wrong with this sentence? There's actually nothing wrong because we wrapped it in FBT, and it's handled in the background. So in a language like Hebrew that's displayed here, command verbs actually take a genderized form. And this would normally be wrong if you weren't going to pivot off of the viewing user's gender, which actually happens behind the scenes at the FBT runtime and at the translation layer. Translators can mark a text as needing to key off of the viewing user's locale with a hidden token. And then at the runtime, we look at the viewing user's gender and pick the right translation. So interpolated tokens can also variate on gender, and we have a special construct that functions just like FBT param, where the gender attribute is required, and we call this FBT Name. And here we see that the text is extracted just like an FBT param, but with the name token. And that's the difference at runtime. We pass in a gender variation value that variates at runtime. And another gender construct we have is FBT pronoun, which offers a convenient way to generate text that would otherwise be pretty tedious to write. and that also deals with gender multiplexing in a sort of different way. The author can decide between 4 different cases: object, possessive, reflexive, and subject. And when passed the gender at runtime, the correct branch is selected from the runtime table. So in this case, we're generating 3 different sentences that are picked at runtime. This is her photo, this is his photo, and this is their photo. And you can see here all the different kind of cases you can come up with. There's 3 to 4 possibilities depending on the type that you pick and then the gender of the token that you're passing. And then we also have enumerations, and these provide a way to construct identical sentences where only a select portion of the sentence changes. In this example, we're creating 4 separate sentences using the enumeration car, house, boat, or houseboat. And it's a call to action to buy one of these things. So we're creating buy a new car, buy a new house, etc. It's also possible that certain enumerations are so common that it makes sense to share parts of them in the code base. And the FBT framework enables this with predefined FBT enums that are defined in separate files. And here we're generating 5 separate strings. So we have link, page, photo, post, and video. And similarly, we'll generate 5 completely different sentences to be extracted from this. So we have name has a photo to share, name has a video to share, name has a link to share, etc. And that's what that example enum is doing in this example. Now, one thing to note, this is much more preferable to trying to interpolate this object with name has a tokenized object to share. And that's because you'll often, those kinds of interpolations often necessitate changes to the outer string. So an example in English is, you might need to use a different indefinite article depending on that parameter. So you'll have a or an depending on what that English word starts with. And in other languages, you have far more complex iterations. And that's why you would want to use an enumeration, because you will now extract the entire text with no token to mess anything up. So we showed earlier in our very simple hello world example, or after our hello world example with the button, how we could insert markup with FBT param. But the framework will actually auto-parameterize for you when you simply wrap your markup with FBT. And it will then take the descriptions and the text itself and take all that verbatim context that it has and generate that for the translators. It's better shown with an example. So here we have three layers of nesting, with the innermost being that span that we see, then finally a link over that span, and then all of it is wrapped in an FBT. And what this does is generate 3 separate strings. So you'll see the outer string go on a tokenized awesome vacation, and that's where the markup's tucked away. Then you'll see tokenized awesome vacation, and finally that innermost string awesome, all extracted as their own separate FBTs. But what's nice is you'll notice those descriptions are auto-generated for you. So the translator gets the exact and full context for where these smaller sentences are going. And this is where a lot of mistranslations come from, where the translator might be translating that awesome word, but they have no idea where it's going. And so to get that right, providing this description for this is in this exact phrase, go on an awesome vacation, is pretty crucial. And that's why we keep that verbatim text included. All right, so demo time. Okay, so first and foremost, if you want to follow along, I don't know if any of you have laptops out and open or not, you can go clone the GitHub branch that we have right here. It's under Facebook Incubator /FBT. And I'll be working in what is the live demo app to kind of display what we're doing and walk you along through this. But you can do the same thing following along right under this folder here. So let's get to it. Let's first make sure this thing starts up. All right, so we have a nice and ugly application to showcase what this is doing behind the scenes. So all of these right now are untranslated. Nothing's wrapped in FBT, and that's what we're going to kind of be walking through today. So we have a bunch of sentences in here. These are both generated from these inputs here, which are supposed to showcase the runtime attributes here. And we have roughly, 8 strings that you can see. But behind the scenes, you probably have up to like 30 or 40 being generated. So let's kind of walk through what this UI looks like now. So what we do first is run our collection. And this is just a Node script running through all the source. And you'll notice it dumps it in this JSON file so we can just take a look at it. So again, we only wrapped the title in this example. And this is all just simple JSON. We're actually we're working on porting some of this to some of the more known open source formats. But right now it's just a simple JSON. You'll notice we have a hash to text, and that's basically the identifier for the string. That's generated from the text in the description. And you have some other metadata, file path, line, column, etc. But what's most important is this, and that's what every FBT call will have. A potential for multiple FBTs. In this case, since it's a simple one, we only have one, your FBT demo. And so if we go and check out what's living in the translations folder, this is where we're basically cheating. This is as if we pulled all the translations we had extracted and put them in a JSON format that we can understand. So we can take a quick peek at, say, so somewhere up here, we'll have that title. And so when we go back to our app and select, say, Arabic, we should see basically this is the only one that we've wrapped, and this is the only one that gets translated. So your FBT demo. So back to English. Let's do one of the more complicated examples. So let's walk through, say, that plural example we discussed. All you need to know here is what we're doing is adding an FBT param and using an FBT plural. So we're generating the sentence, name has shared a photo with you or many photos with you. And let's go ahead and see if that extracts or if I mess something up here. All right, so we can take a look at the source strings we're now extracting. And you'll see that, again, we have two. Name is shared, say 2 photos with you, and name is shared a photo with you for the English singular. And if we go take a look and match these up with, say, our Arabic translations, we can see what kind of strings we'll generate. So let's go ahead and generate those translations and take a look at what we get. Actually, this is so small I might as well just cat it. Okay. So here you can see the Arabic. I think we're also going to have all the other locales we have. Thanks Emacs. So here's our title, and this is, say, the Spanish title as well. This is our fake, this is our fake locale FB Hacksaw, my favorite one because it enables me to test everything we have. So this is an example of it varying on viewing user gender. But again, here's our Hebrew. Name has shared, oh, I can't read it, so I'm not even going to try. But here it is varying on those various plurals. So let's go ahead and see what it looks like at runtime. think we had Hebrew in there. So someone has shared a photo with you. And if we change the count, I believe the plural rules for Hebrew are roughly the same. We should see that change. There we go. So there's singular, plural, etc. And let's go ahead and check out, let's see, do we have time for pronoun? How are we on time? 3 minutes, okay. Let's go ahead and check out pronoun really quickly. I'll try and make this as quick as possible in Emacs because I cannot change the font on the fly right now. All right. So here we're generating this string. Name has a enum, which is again our example enum from back with link, page, photo, etc. to share. And we're also using some auto parameterization here with some bold and links. And then we finally have our pronoun. We're using possessive. And so we're saying someone has a photo to share, click on her link. And again, we're using that enum again in the sentence. But because we're using that same enum range and same enum value, we're not exploding that sentence into, say, 25 examples. There's still only 5, if that makes sense. So when you run a collection, whew, shame on me for not doing this locally. All right. When we run a collection now, we should pick those up. And then when we pull in the translations, combined with those new extractions, we should see those pronouns pop in. Oh, you know what? Let's make sure that we pulled in that. So the thing about those enums is they do require the extraction scripts to know about them ahead of time. So let's see if that worked anyhow. There we are. So I can't read this. Someone has a link, someone has a page, photo to share. And similarly, someone has a video, page, and link to share. And depending on the gender of that pronoun, it'll change that sentence. So we have male singular, female singular, not a person, etc. I'll be around if you have any questions. But yeah, that's the FBT framework in a nutshell.